House in Baltimore and WNST.net. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon for Luke Jones and I. Luke was out doing the football thing as we're all getting ready for Ray Lewis and the induction, and I'm talking to Tony Siragusa and Marquis Douglas and Adam Terry and Patrick Johnson, and the next thing you know, the Orioles got very, very heated and overheated at the trading deadline. About 3:15, the news started to leak, and by 4 o'clock, Luke, this was a full-on fire sale, bloodletting at the trading deadline that certainly the franchise did not prepare its fan base for on Gausman and Scope, because I did not wake up on Tuesday thinking they were going anywhere.
Yeah, well, I mean, just history would lead you to believe that they wouldn't do that. I mean, it hasn't been very often in the history of this franchise where they have traded young, controllable, talented players. I mean, it's one thing, and we've talked about this. I mean, trading Manny Machado, there was no thought to that anymore. That was a no-brainer thing that you had to do. It was just a matter of how good of a deal could you get. Same thing with Zach Britton. Brad Brock, because he hadn't performed well, ended up being basically a salary dump. They got a little bit of international slot money. But in the case of Scope and Gausman, now, there had been discussions, there had been murmurs, there had been rumors out there, but I think anyone who has paid attention and typically seen how the Orioles operate, you figured what? They would wait, because that's what they typically do. I mean,
well, they've been run by the same guy for 25 years, and as much as the guy's a creep and he's crazy and all that, he was really predictable. And I mean, literally in a lot of ways, there was nothing about this that was predictive. You know what I mean? Like, I could sort of get into Peter's mind, and you sort of knew what Peter was going to do. I mean, it was never good. It was never a great idea, but this is not Peter's idea. I mean, very obviously, Peter had nothing to do with this, right? I mean, this is not the way he would have gone about things.
Well, this is going all in on the fact that you're rebuilding. Like I said, just because you trade Manny Machado and Zach Britton, who are pending free agents, that does not make it a rebuilding effort. That's something you just do because you're trying to recover whatever value's left for a couple players. I mean, that's something that teams do all the time. Even teams that are maybe not going to the playoffs that season, but are not necessarily considering themselves big-time sellers.
Hey, look, the Nationals were trying to get a couple of thumbtacks for, for Bryce Harper, sure, right?
Right. So I think from that standpoint, that's where this really does signal a changing of the guard, a changing of an era. However you want to try to label it, it's very clear now that the Orioles are all in on rebuilding. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to do it correctly. There is a history of multiple teams in multiple generations of trying to rebuild, and it doesn't work out.
Draft a pitcher next year with the number one pick and watch him blow his arm out, and that's the end of that, right?
Well, I mean, it can't come down to one player, but certainly, you're looking at the number one pick. I mean, I think with the Orioles having acquired more international signing bonus slot money on Tuesday, to me, it appears they're all in on trying to sign Victor Mesa whenever they can, whenever he's eligible to be signed, because they have more slot money than anyone in the majors at this point. So,
does anyone really know how that works? I mean, like, literally, what percentage of the fan base understands international money? Well, I understand it a little bit, but I'm certainly not an expert. But I know they haven't used it, and I know to the detriment, and I know it was put in to sort of level the playing field so the Yankees and the Dodgers didn't go around with $100 bills for Dominican kids and haul them up to the States and break rules and do all of that sort of wild, wild west stuff. I mean, but that being said, the Orioles have never drank from that pond, so I don't even know what that looks like. When you don't have scouts there, I don't know how you sign guys. I mean, look, everybody can look at Victor Mesa and say, okay, sure, everybody in baseball is in on him, but how are you going to find the next 15-year-old phenom?
Well, and that's where that part of it's going to be a process. I mean, it's one thing to acquire some slot money, or some slots, I should say, and then sign a couple guys. Most of the international free agents have been accounted for, but Mesa's at the top of that list, and there are a couple others here and there. So it's one thing to just kind of jump into that, but if they're going to make meaningful headway into the international market, they're going to have to invest in terms of resources, in terms of networking, in terms of scouting. I mean, that's how it's done. To your point, the slot, the slot system, so to speak, the cap that you have, so to speak, has limited some of the Wild Wild West element to that, but you still have to have relationships and scouts and a presence in Latin America or wherever you're trying to scout internationally. So
it's hard for good scouts to pick good players and then crystal ball it, and 7 years later, Sid Thrift can say, "Let me ever tell you about the time I discovered Barry Bonds." There's none of that going on today. They got 15 kids, right? And I don't know, 4 or 5 of them ever play in the big leagues. I guess you got something. If 2 of them are in the lineup in 2021 and really contributing, and one of the pitchers works, then I guess it was a successful day. I don't think they got 8 major leaguers out of this, but maybe they did. And if they did that, then we'll be sitting here in 2021 or 22 really talking about something. We'll be talking about it like the Tippy Martinez, Rick Dempsey, Scott McGregor trade, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think anyone who's expecting, and not saying you are, but anyone who's expecting that much of a hit rate, so to speak, you're going to be disappointed. But as far as the overall deals, I mean, we spent time talking about the slot money. To me, that was kind of the big part of the Atlanta deal where they sent Kevin Gausman and Darren O'Day. I'll be honest, I'm not a big fan of that deal. I'm not a big fan of including O'Day in that deal because including him, basically you had Atlanta take on money. I'd rather have better prospect talent than saving some money because, you save the money, there's no guarantee that money is going towards things that you needed to go towards, like player development and scouting, which I fully believe that they're going to do those things, but to what degree and, where's the trade-off as far as lowering payroll, because you're not going to have a $150 million payroll like they've had the last couple of years.
Well, they saved $3 million just by not having Darren O'Day wearing their hat.
Right.
So that's $3 million. I mean, that's a lot of money.
Well, it's what he's owed this year and then $9 million next year. So I don't like that deal as much. I think that deal, to me, and look, I know Kevin Gausman has never become the ace that they hoped he might become as the 4th overall pick in the 2012 draft, but he's still been an accomplished, solid, middle-of-the-rotation major league starter. I mean, and 2 years of club control, and also, in the eyes of many people, still some untapped potential there that could be unleashed at some point.
Well, he's a better pitcher than Arrieta by stock, right?
By far. It's not even close. I mean, anyone who makes that comparison of Kevin Gausman to Jake Arrieta, you just didn't pay attention because Kevin Gausman's been a solid major league pitcher. He hasn't been great. He's been inconsistent, certainly. But look at the numbers. Look at the adjusted ERA.
I'm making a different comparison than you. The comparison I make is he's a better prospect than Arrieta ever was, right?
No, and he's done a lot more for the Orioles than Jake Arrieta ever did.
Fair enough. I understand.
It's not close. I mean, look at the numbers and get back to me if anyone listening and thinks I'm full of it. But
I think at Gausman, I kind of compare him to Ben McDonald, who had this otherworldly ceiling when you're the number 4 pick in the draft.
Well,
you're a guy that they think can go to the Hall of Fame, literally, right? I mean,
and that's part of it, too. And go back and look at what Ben McDonald did for the Orioles. Like, some people call him a bust. Ben McDonald, despite having some injuries and never becoming the next Jim Palmer, still had some good numbers for the Orioles when he pitched. And I'd throw Matt Wieters into that conversation as well. Matt Wieters didn't become Johnny Bench, but he was still an all-star catcher and still goes down as one of the top 3 or 4 catchers in the history of the franchise. Just didn't become that guy. So when you have those expectations, you're going to have that. But getting back to my point as far as it relates to this trade, having Gausman, who to this point has been no worse than an average major league starting pitcher, still 2 years of club control after this, still some upside that I think maybe in a different organization like Atlanta, maybe being reunited with Dave Wallace and Dom Chidi, who are both in that organization, maybe he hits another level. I would have liked to have seen a little better value as far as what they got. I'm not saying it's terrible.
Well, it is what it is. I mean, the dude's got a 4.5 ERA most of the time, and he's not a 240-inning guy.
No one's a 240.
I understand
guy
that, but
you have to understand what's realistic in Major League Baseball. Look, I'm not saying the number 1 prospect in baseball, but I think they could have done better for themselves than they did in this one. I really do. I just think...
Well, he wins 18 games in Atlanta and pitches to a 3.3 ERA and makes 34 starts next year. You'll look up and you'll say mistake. And I think he could do that. I mean, I'm not betting against Kevin Gausman. I don't know that I would have gotten rid of him, quite frankly. And I will judge these kids more harshly because there was tread left on his tire, you know what I mean?
Right.
And the other part of this is what they're going to have to pay these guys next year and the next year to stink, quite frank, for the team to stink, I'm talking about. So, again, I don't know who's going to come out and watch AAA baseball or AA baseball because they've really gutted themselves of a major league franchise right now. You know, I don't know who's going to be on the team. They're certainly not going into the free agent market, and they're certainly not going to draft anybody this offseason that's going to suddenly become a major league. I don't know where their players are going to come from. I mean, are they going to go out and stock up the old Jay Payton, Quad A, Colby Rasmus and Pedro Alvarez to fill out the – I mean, I guess that's what they're going to have to do because they're not going to get real players to come in and play those roles, I don't think.
Well, and you shouldn't be spending big-time money on veteran players when you're that kind of team. They'll bring in some guy. I mean, that's the last thing I'm interested in. I mean, this team was 40-plus games under 500 with Manny Machado and with Jonathan Scope and with Kevin Gausman and with Zach Britton and with Brad Brock this year. And
hey, they were 0-21 with Eddie Murray, and the next year they weren't, right? So yeah, I got you.
Right. So I mean, and that's not to paint a rosy picture for the next couple of years. It's going to be ugly. I mean, that's what rebuilding is. That's why there's always this thought whenever a team's not doing well. And I'm not saying specifically the Orioles, but any team. The Nationals are a perfect example of this right now. There was talk the last few days that they could potentially blow it up. There were reports Monday night that Bryce Harper was potentially available. Now, I know Mike Rizzo on Tuesday squashed that, but there you're talking about a team that, yes, has underperformed, but they're sitting at 500, and they're only, 5 or 6 games out of first place with two really young teams that most people feel have played over their heads.
That they have a lot of games left with, too.
Yeah, but there were a lot of people talking about them rebuilding, and I think you look at where the Orioles are at this point, where they had no choice in the matter whatsoever, that things had deteriorated and gotten this poor, that you look at that situation and say, man, be careful what you wish for. Rebuilding shouldn't be something that you just kind of feel really good about jumping into. It's kind of the thing you do when you have no other choice. So, but I think you look at these deals, like I said, the Gausman deal, I don't like including O'Day in that because that zaps some of the return value that Gausman had, quite frankly. But we'll see. I think they got a couple interesting players in that deal. I'm not saying that there's no talent whatsoever. I think Giancarlo Encarnacion, the lower-level infielder, is a really intriguing player with some power.
I'm just wondering if Gary Thorne will be here to mispronounce his name.
I know, right? That was one of the first things I thought of. But he's at single A right now. I mean, he's going to be 2, maybe 3 years away. He's 20 years old, which is okay. But, you look at the list, the rest of those guys, Brett Cumberland, the catcher. I've seen conflicting accounts of some of these different Baseball America and Fangraphs. Fangraphs liked him a lot. Some of the other publications I saw thought he was, kind of a Caleb Joseph kind of guy, just a younger version of him. So, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But the Gausman deal, I think they could have done better. And, to the point that you made, they didn't have to make a trade for him now. If it had been me, and look, I'm not a prospect guru, and Dan Duquette and the Orioles scouts, and they know a lot more about these teams' minor league systems. And the one thing that he pointed out after the trade, they did their homework on these teams because they were talking to some of these teams about Manny Machado. They were talking to these teams about Zach Britton. So some of the groundwork had been laid already. But I think looking at the return they got for Gausman, if they don't land Victor Mesa with this extra slot money that they got, then this trade's going to look a lot worse. If they get him, I think it looks acceptable, but I would have been a little more inclined to maybe roll the dice and wait until this offseason and see if you could have gotten a team to bite a little bit harder than the Braves did. The Scope deal, that one, I'm okay with that one. That one felt, for me, a little more in line with the returns that they got for Machado and Britton.
Those names that the Brewers were throwing around, those were names that were being thrown around with all sorts of big-name people that the Brewers were going to get. So when I saw those names, they were very recognizable names that I had heard for the last 3 weeks bandied about with the Brewers, right? I mean, they were desired guys that you would want to get for a John Scope, right?
Right. And to the point you were making a few minutes ago about where this team's going to be from a major league talent standpoint, Jonathan Villar is an accomplished middle infield super utility type, put up really good numbers 2 years ago. In fact, stole 60-plus bases, led the majors in stolen bases in 2016. So he's going to be on the Major League roster. He'll join the club later this week. He's been on the DL recently, but he should be a solid contributor for them.
He's a Major League Baseball player. He's a real Major League Baseball player, yes.
Of the 15 players they got, he is the one already established major leaguer that they have. They've
had 20 home runs in the big leagues. He had 40 doubles one year. I mean, he stole 60 bases. He's a
he's fine.
He's a legitimate Major League Baseball player.
He's fine. I mean, he's solid. I think he's a guy. Honestly, he's a guy that a year from now they might be able to flip at the deadline and get someone else. If they, depending on where they are at that point in the process.
And he's also not going to be so good they're not going to have to give him $14 million a year like they did Scope.
He's not a superstar, but he's a solid player. Luis Ortiz is an interesting right-handed starting pitching prospect. Real good fastball, pretty good slider from what I've read. The question with him, injury, he's had some injury issues and conditioning. He's had some weight issues. Almost reminds you of Sidney Ponson in that way. But he's 22, and that's the kind of guy that has some upside where if he realizes some of that potential, gets himself a little better condition, he's the kind of guy that sounds like he could be a top half of the rotation Major League starter. And then the other guy in the deal, Gene Carmona, an 18-year-old shortstop, 18-year-old middle infielder. I mean, he's one of those guys that is 3, maybe 4 years away, but those are the types of players, those international free agents, whether it's from the Dominican or wherever in Latin America, you want some of those guys, and you know that you're planting a seed, and you're not going to see that seed start blossoming for a long time, but you're hoping that you sign guys or acquire a number of guys like that one of them becomes a Gene Segura, Francisco Lindor one day, something like that. That type of middle infield talent, but he's a long ways away. So he's an ultimate boomer bust kind of guy.
High ceiling, long way, right?
Yeah. I mean, he's got some pop. He's hit some doubles. He's hit some triples. When you have an 18-year-old that has that many triples and doubles, you wonder, once he fills out a little more, does that turn into home run power? So I think the Scope deal, I wouldn't say I loved it, but I thought that one was solid. I was underwhelmed by the Gausman deal, but if, and it's a big if, they take that international slot money and they're able to land Victor Mesa, who is the ultimate international free agent still out there.
Why would he sign with you? I'm not being mean.
Because they can give him more money than anyone at this point. I mean, they can. They have more slot money than anyone. And the other thing about him that's different is he's not 18. He's 22, I believe.
There's 2 Victor Mesas. There's 3, actually, the father. There's a 16-year-old and a 21-year-old.
Yeah, Junior is I think he's 17 right now. He's younger, but Victor Mesa, who we're talking about, is 22.
Are we just going to call him Victor if they sign him, or are we going to call him?
I don't know. I mean, it's
V2,
Victor. His father's Victor Mesa, and so I don't know if he has a kid, he'll be Victor, I guess. But
I hope he's victorious.
Right. But by all accounts, he's someone that's fast tracked to the majors. He's someone that probably would be signed, go into Bowie immediately, and probably have a good chance to be in the major leagues next year. I mean, that's what kind of talent he's thought of being. So
he's Puiggy, right? Kind of, sort of like, right?
I don't think he's as big.
No, he's a smaller guy. I've seen him.
He's a smaller guy.
But I'm just saying, as far as fast track, like Puig didn't do 3 years in the minors.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean he's a smaller guy, but he's a fast
Major League ready is what we would call him.
Yeah, really close.
Yes.
Probably, and I haven't heard this, but in comparison to Yusniel Diaz, probably a notch ahead of him as far as Major League ready. And Diaz is at Bowie right now, so I think. I mean, to your point, I mean, there's no guarantee, and that goes back to what I said a little bit earlier as far as the international market in general. It's why you need to beef up your scouting and your presence, because it is very much relationship-oriented. It's not solely about the money. Yes, the money's a big part of it, but you want to make inroads, and you build relationships, you build trust, and you start getting a little bit more of a pipeline. But in the case of Mesa, they're going to be able to spend more money on him than anyone else. And I know the Marlins, they've jockeyed for some signing bonus money. The Yankees, believe it or not, they've acquired some signing bonus money, but the Orioles still, by everything I understand, they still have more than any other team at this point in the international signing period. So that's where they're going to try to land him. We'll see if it happens, and certainly if they don't land him and they're kind of left with these slots and not the talent to justify spending it on, it might be some lesser signings and they have slots left over, and then this Gausman deal kind of by default doesn't look nearly as good then.
He is Baltimore Luke on Twitter, and Luke at WNST.net. All of our WNST coverage brought to you by two new sponsors, Charles Newsonoff & Sons. Go see Sydney over there. We'll be telling you more about all the things they're doing there, as well as our friends at Sporticulture. Just added that this week, Court is selling some fantastic bouquets of fresh flowers we're going to have here behind me, and it's all Ravens. You can get a Redskins flower if you want, or Steelers flower, but I'm going to recommend you get the Ravens. They're 50% off with the code WNST out at Sporticulture.com. So we're adding some new sponsors here for football season. And certainly our friends at Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast, with the tasty coffee. Make sure you're downloading that app and you're using that ROFO rewards, either the card or the app. The app's easy to use. You'll get your coffee, you'll get your Western fries, your chicken. Load up on those points and get your 7th cup of coffee free. It's Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. And certainly this trade thing happened real fast, didn't it? I mean, I don't... Are you shocked? Or I'm shocked. I mean, I'm literally shocked. I did not plan the middle of the day to have to stop everything. I know you were out in Owings Mills. It stands as one of the most shocking things I've ever seen the Orioles do on any given day, right? So, and I feel like they've been pretty predictable for 25 years. This is just outside the realm of anything I think you and I could have sat around and predicted on Monday.
Well, I mean, am I shocked thinking that it was impossible that it could happen? No, but I certainly didn't expect it. I mean, I figured after it became apparent over the weekend that Adam Jones wasn't going to waive his no-trade clause or 10-5 rights, at least right now, certainly I think it's still a possibility in August if he has a change of heart. And maybe John Scope and Kevin Gausman no longer being on this team might push him in that direction. Who knows? But I certainly didn't anticipate Gausman and Scope being traded because I just figured because they didn't have to trade them now, and you kind of go to that default Orioles position, specifically in this Dan Duquette, Buck Showalter era, where they have typically, even things that they've done correctly, they haven't done it in a swift period of time. It's always been something where they kind of wait to the last minute, and maybe they still might find a way to do it right. With Gausman having 2 more years of club control, with Scope still having next year, I thought both of them, and I even wrote about this Monday at WNST.net, kind of alluding to, I figured if it wasn't going to happen now, you need to get both of them dealt by the winter because you certainly don't want to be going into spring training with Scope being a rental player, not being able to trade to a team with the qualifying offer possibility. That's a nice little perk for a team acquiring him. And in the case of Gausman, I think, sometime between now and the off season was going to be the sweet spot time to kind of maximize your value for him. I already said I didn't love the return for him. I would have been a little more inclined to hold on to him, but it's very clear whether it's Dan Duquette or whether it's someone else at the end of this season that the Orioles as an organization has made a decision that they're rebuilding, and they're going all in on that rebuild. And it wasn't just going to be trade Machado and Britton and then sign a couple middling free agents and try to sell people that you're good enough to make it as a wild card. Which
the Castro and the Cobb thing is another part of this, right? By the way, we're 30 minutes into this, and we haven't said the 2 words. Adam and Jones.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking, who else do they have left? I mean, Bundy's going to run out there. But they still have 3 major league pitchers, literally, right?
Yeah. I mean, I still think there's some players that they could deal in the month of August. I mean, I've mentioned Jones as a possibility. I think it's very possible he could sneak through waivers and you could trade him because of the salary that he's still owed. I think Mark Trumbo is someone they absolutely should be looking to try to deal, even if that means they need to eat some money just to get him off the roster, because that opens up a spot that you can get Trey Mancini out of the outfield, and you can either DH Mancini or you put Mancini at first and you DH Davis. You get Scope or you get Trumbo off the roster. That makes it a little less crowded in the outfield, where you want to get a look at Cedric Mullins. So, I think Danny Valencia will go at some point, whether he's dealt for a bag of baseballs or is designated for assignment. And the other name that I think is possible, you mentioned the 3 starting pitchers. Andrew Cashner is not that expensive next year. Although I think the Orioles could view him as someone to kind of anchor your rotation, because you don't want to put too much pressure on these young pitchers that, let's face it, are probably going to get beat up quite a bit over the next year or two.
Well, we saw that with Jeffrey, whatever his name is, on Tuesday night.
Yeah, but I'm talking like even the Dean Kramers and some of the guys that they've acquired that they hope can, or Dylan Tate, who was the centerpiece of the Britton trade. You still want to have a couple veterans that you can lean on a little bit, even if they're not going to be great, just to give you some innings. And I wonder if Cashner ends up still being that guy for them next year. But I could also see a wild card contender needing to shore up the back end of its rotation. I could see them looking at Andrew Cashner on, certainly not a deal that's going to be bringing you much, but if you're looking to clear another spot, you could do that. But there's still some moves to be made, and certainly, I am surprised, though, that we're talking about a Scope and a Gausman trade. I mean, maybe if you had told me one of them, but the way that it was 2, and how about the fact that it came together so quickly? I mean, the medical record reviews alone, we know the Orioles don't operate very swiftly. So for them to pull that off the way they did, again, time will tell whether they got good returns, and I have my doubts about the Gausman deal that they made, but they're all in on rebuilding it. Now it's just a matter of how well they're going to execute it.
Yeah, what was the knock on Gausman, by the way? I mean, paying him. I know that's coming down the line. And I would think the same thing, obviously, on Scope. I mean, Scope's had one of those kind of years where he's going to be a $12 or $14 million ball player next year after. Once they get arbitration going, I don't know why they quit on Gausman. You know what I mean? Like that sort of shocks me, and to your point, you're a little underwhelmed by what they got back, and obviously part of getting rid of Gausman was, well, we'll take $12 million of O'Day for you, right? I mean, that was part of that too, because trading O'Day was something that wouldn't have been possible had they not thrown something else in or sweetened the deal to some degree, right? Because no one wanted that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think with Gausman, I think it just comes down to this. He was going to get really expensive next year and was going to be expensive the year after that. And, I mean, you get to a point, then he's up for free agency. Best case scenario, the Orioles are ready to ready to be competitive again in 2021. So you've spent a lot of money on 2 of his prime years as a pitcher, and now you're going to have to pay him a whole lot more money just to stay, and that's if you're ready at that point. That's if the rebuild is, dare I say, a little ahead of schedule. So, you're basically wasting a lot of his value there for a team that's not going to win. So the thought is you try to maximize that value and get younger players that their minor league or their major league clock has not started yet, and it'll start at some point in the next year or two, you hope, and then you're going to have a lot more cheaper, valuable labor in that regard. So that's kind of the way it works with younger players. I mean, unless you have a generational kind of player, to me, I mean, Scope would have been someone I certainly would have considered signing long term, but at what price? And he was so close to free agency at this point, you really wonder what would that number have been to have to get it done for him. And I'm not sure I'm going, to the moon and back to try to keep Jonathan Scope on a lucrative long-term deal. So I mean, they've made a decision. They've chosen a direction. You don't have to agree with it or not, but at least it is a direction rather than this. Oh, we'll wait, we'll punt.
And by the way, I haven't said this. We've been talking 30 minutes. I'm okay with all of this, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I have no – the thing that I'm not okay with First off, having my media credential taken. Let's start with that. But who's running the team? Who's calling the shots? Does Duquette have a job at the end of this year? What's the real plan here? Are you going to lay it out for fans? You're going to take some questions from people not employed by the team? Are you going to sit down and explain to the fans what's going on? Or are you going to run and you're going to hide? I know this. They have to sell tickets now. And whatever they're going to do with Victor Mesa or whatever Dean Kramer or whatever Luis Ortiz, any of these names, and they're just names at this point, none of these names are selling them tickets, but neither was Machado, neither was Scope. I saw Dan Roderick wrote a piece, and look, I'm a big Dan fan. Dan and I are friends. This isn't a cheap shot. I went after him on Facebook. Dan Roderick said Adam Jones was a more popular player than Cal Ripken. And I'm like, I'm like spitting out the water. I'm like, no one has ever paid to see Adam Jones play. No one has ever driven, all night to see Adam Jones play baseball or Manny Machado or any of these guys from what are we marketing around? Why will people come to our stadium and pay to watch our team play? And I know that's not the most important thing because they're bleeding money off of television and they're selling garden gnomes and I have no idea what the hell they're going to do with that Kevin Gosman giveaway from the Game of Thrones or the House of Thrones, whatever the hell it's called. But what's their marketing plan? There's their marketing plan is we're really going to stink for a couple years and come watch these kids? Okay. I mean, nobody wanted to come and watch the Major League players at Major League prices. So I'm always worried about the big picture, Luke. That's why I did the walkout in 2006. I shared the standings, of them from 1998 through 2012 earlier, online. And I know what that looks like. I know what fourth place, third place, fifth place. I know what that looks like. And if this is a 2-year bump, okay, we'll suffer it. And if they can be a 500 team 2 years from now, fine. I'm not going anywhere. I tell all of them, I was here the day you got here. I'll be here the day you're gone. But I don't really sense that there's a strategy that I can explain to their fan base. And you know more than I do, and I don't know that you have a strategy they can really sell to the fan base. Say, what are you really doing here? And why is Cashner? Why are some of these guys here and why not? And explain the real inner workings of these deals and where's the payroll going and who's running the place. I mean, that's really the issue is they've allowed Dan Duquette to stand in front of this thing, right? He did it in the 5th inning of the game on Tuesday night. He's the architect now, right? He's the one answering the questions. He's the one dealing the players. He's the one on the bat phone. No doubt he has to go to John and Lou or Brady. And Brady, from everyone in the organization, they tell me Brady's involved in this in some way, and it's like he doesn't work there. So the problem I have is really the accountability of sending Dan Duquette out to this dumpster fire, and then on October 4th, he lets his contract expire, and he wasn't fired. We just didn't bring him back. And I remember Andy McPhail sort of snuck out the door, 5 weeks after Flanagan killed himself, and never had a word to say, and never had to answer a word, and just bye-bye, see you later. Well, there's no saying that that's where we're going to be with Duquette 8 weeks from now, where they're trying to figure this out. And if they do have Duquette signed, why wouldn't that be part of whatever the plan is? Do I think Dan Duquette should be the architect? Probably not. I don't think there's anything exciting about him. I don't think he doesn't excite the media, doesn't excite the fan base. I don't think his track record's been all that good to say he's impeccable. He has to own the 120 losses they're going to have this year as well. And they've allowed, allegedly, and you never know with them because I don't really know whether Duquette was the guy pulling all these, or whether somebody in the scouting department is more involved in that, or who checked off on these minor league players and cross-checking, whatever. I just don't know what they're doing. Again, they've dealt for 15 young players, and we still have no idea who's in charge of the team. And that's so typical, and I guess they don't have to tell us anything, but it was kind of an ugly day on Tuesday, and you would think behind it all, the people that own it, that have pocketed $1 billion off of this in profit, would stand up and say, you know what? This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. And we want to be accountable to the fans. Not we're going to trot out a lame duck, mediocre general manager who's been mediocre as a general manager when he's been in charge of decisions. But the whole thing's such an S show. I can't blame him for it being bad. We've talked about this many, many times. But this is a day where you start to measure and say, all right, when when they draft Lamar Jackson, we know who to blame or who to praise or at least what went down in there. I don't ever know with the Orioles. And I think that that's the mystery to all of this. And they're going to have to go out and sell this. Sell these young players, sell season tickets, sell sponsorships, sell advertising. Do all the things that they do in the offseason from a business standpoint to get them onto the field next year where everybody knows they're probably going to lose 95 to 110 games next year. And I can tell you that in August of this year. So they've got to be better at being better, and I still don't see that. I saw this as sort of a little bit of a runaround, and now we're going to get quiet, and you and I are going to run off with Ray Lewis and watch him do the squirrel on Saturday. And, and this is going to get sleepier, I think, over the next 60 days until they deal Adam Jones, I guess. And I would think he won't be here Labor Day, right? Or am I wrong?
Well, he says he's not. I mean, until he waives his no-trade clause, he's here. But I think I agree with a lot of what you say, but I disagree with some of it. I mean, they are establishing a direction here, or they wouldn't have done anything. For 4 months we basically said, "What is this team doing? They're not doing anything." They hadn't fired anyone. They hadn't made any meaningful personnel changes other than maybe designating Pedro Alvarez for assignment. They're rebuilding. It's a very clear direction what they're trying to do now. Will they execute it properly every step along the way and be really good in 2022? I have no idea. But
you got it at 22, do you? That's where you're going with 20. I was going 21.
Well, I mean, 2021, 2022, whatever.
That's a long season now. That's a whole 12 months there. That's a big difference between 21 and 22.
I mean, it is, and
no doubt.
To the point that you made as far as marketing this team, to me, that's why they hired John Vittle in, because he's well regarded, and I think they knew that they were going to be doing this, and we'll see how he's allowed to do his job. We'll see what kind of autonomy he has on the business side as far as marketing and getting people to come to the ballpark, and he's surely not going to have an easy job, especially early on. And now, if a couple of these guys that they've acquired and guys that they already have in their system pop and become stars in the next year or two, then it becomes easier. It's easier to market your team when you have a young Adam Jones and then a young Manny Machado comes and then Jonathan Scope. They need their next wave of those types of guys to come through. Maybe not Machado because he's a kind of a generational talent that doesn't come along every other year or anything like that. But they're going to have to work really hard on that end. And to me, that's why they hired him in the first place. So hopefully that helps. And from the baseball side, I hear you loud and clear on Dan Duquette. I think you're selling him a little short in terms of when he's been asked to build an organization. Look what he did in Montreal, albeit a long time ago. Look what he did in Boston, albeit a long time ago. But, what he came into with the Orioles, different situation because even though we didn't know it at the time, they were on the cusp of starting to win, and there was...
I will just say this. If he's gone October 15th, this whole thing was a fiasco to me. If you're letting him make the deals and then not having him run the place...
Okay, to me, it would be a fiasco if you had someone who wasn't qualified to doing it in some kind of let's say they hired someone on an interim basis who had no quality...
Like John Angelos, if John Angelos is picking the players.
Let's say they had fired Duquette and let Brady Anderson do it, and then they hired a baseball ops guy in the fall. That, to me, would have been... I mean, Dan Duquette's a respected GM. I mean, whether he's the best in the league, where you think he ranks, wherever, to me, this either signals that they are considering keeping him on, or at the very least, he's trying his best to audition for his next job in baseball. And by most accounts, even with my criticism of the Atlanta trade, the Gausman and O'Day trade, by most accounts, people think he's done a pretty good job. People think the Orioles have done a pretty decent job here. Time will tell, but you can only acquire the prospects from their prospects. I mean, you don't have a crystal ball in the same way that when Ozzie Newsome picks football players in April, he doesn't know whether
sometimes he picks Ray Lewis, sometimes he picks Brashad Perryman.
Right. So, I mean, you don't know, but just from the information and from the evaluations that are out there at this point, most people seem to think the Orioles did a pretty solid job. I wouldn't give them an A or an A+, but I think the consensus out there, people would probably give them a
Well,
B.
the whole thing is brought on by a fiasco, right? I mean, they're 45 games under 500. They've mismanaged Machado all the way. They've kind of sort of mismanaged Scope. If they really wanted to keep him around, they would have signed him, but they haven't mismanaged him now because they turned him into a couple ball players, which is the mistake they made with Machado a couple of years ago, as well as with Britton not dealing those guys. Again, I'm not against the sell-off. I mean, it makes all the sense in the world for me, but I would love to do it with some semblance of these are the guys running the place, these are the guys that are staying, and we own the place. The brothers own the team, and we're going to do this thing differently than the old man did. And obviously, the trades unto themselves and kids getting in free means that they are doing things differently than the old man. The fact that they have a lame duck general manager doing this right now and a lame duck manager doing this right now is a little weird to me. That's all I'm going to say.
That's fair, and I don't disagree with those points whatsoever. I just think, to the point that you just made, some of the actions are speaking louder than words. And yes, it's not perfect. And I mean, ideally, if you're going to have Dan Duquette handle the start of this rebuild, why not just commit to him then? If you trust him enough to trade off some valuable pieces for minor league talent, why wouldn't you trust him moving forward and really give him that kind of autonomy?
If you're going to let him bring 15 players in on July 31st,
right. I mean, why not let him?
Why does he not have a job October 15th?
Well, and maybe that will still be the case, but it is strange that you wouldn't say that out loud. I mean, for me, Buck Showalter still being the manager at this point. I mean, if you want to fire them just because you think that's the thing to do at this point, I mean, fine. It doesn't matter. They're terrible. They're going to lose well over 100 games. I mean,
I would only fire him if I thought he wasn't good with young players and didn't really want to do it. And I think at this point, Buck, look, if Adam Jones is chasing a ring right now, what is Buck Showalter doing? You know what I mean? Like, far further down the line to winning a championship, to come back into spring training knowing you can't win a World Series at his age, I just on the face of it, unless he is some Jack McKeon, young person whisperer who's just sitting around because he's got nothing better to do and wants to manage, like Frank Robinson and Davey Johnson, quite frankly, at the end, because they didn't have anything else to do. There's nothing left to be decorated. There's no more money left to be made that you're going to spend. Then it becomes about winning. And in the case of Buck, I would be disappointed for Buck if Buck signed up here for 4 more years into this. It would say a lot to me about where Buck is in winning at this point, because and same thing with Adam Jones at the end of the year. Adam Jones will take an extra third year here and take more money to sign up for this. Then that tells me Adam Jones doesn't want to win. And that might be important to his wife and his family and staying here and living at Cal Ripken's house and all that. But if you're not going to tell me you're going to want to be a part of this right now and win. And, I asked Markakis about that 3 weeks ago. And look, with Markakis, I don't know how many other options he had. I mean, they offered him a real amount of money down there. They overpaid him down there because that team was right where this team is right now. That team was a 100-loss team when he signed up down there. He was going to be that sage veteran guy, and maybe it'll pay off. Maybe they'll make the playoffs this year. He's certainly already been an all-star. But it is the 4th year down there. You know what I mean? So there was a lot of bad there that Markakis remembers from back in the aughts around here when the team did nothing but lose, that I don't think Adam Jones wants to sign up at 33. And if he does, shame on him. And if Buck Showalter wants to sign up for that, shame on him too, because you're not signing up for winning at that point.
But
you're signing up.
If you have that mindset, they're never going to turn it around, because you're saying shame on them to people that have been committed to Baltimore and committed to the Orioles. I mean, I hear the point you're trying to make.
And well compensated. I don't know about committed. I hear that about all these guys. I mean, you're making $15 million a year, you're committed. Okay. I mean, I'll hear that, but let's not
add. You're not saying Adam Jones hasn't been committed to Baltimore? I mean, my goodness.
Sure he is, but why would he be committed to 110 losses the next 2 years at 33? Why would he want to be committed to that?
Then they should just close up shop, because you're just going to trash anyone that's going to come in that wants to help turn them around.
No, I think you bring in some Kevin Cash type of young manager that wants to work with young players and thinks he'll be 43 when they win in 2022, not 65. I mean,
to be very clear, I think they should start fresh at the manager's spot. I do, but I'm not going to. I mean, I don't see the need, and this is the same thing that people are doing right now, trashing Adam Jones because he doesn't want to waive his 10-5 rights. I mean, my goodness, we want players and people to be committed to teams, and we hear about loyalty all the time, and then when it's the reverse, we trash
but
them and say,
there is no reverse.
The
team has no loyalty to them. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, it is a very much a business proposition at this point, you know?
I mean,
the team loved Kevin Gausman so much they made $25,000 flying whatever the hell, Tyrannosaurus or whatever the pterodactyls, whatever the hell they are, and then they dealt him. So, let's not talk about loyalty being, a one-way street. I agree with you. Adam Jones has been a great Oriole. He should leave. It's
his decision.
Yeah, okay, good for him.
It's his decision. He doesn't care what you think.
I know that.
He doesn't care what I think. He doesn't care what...
Well, then he can come to the ballpark and be 45 games under 500, collect the $16 million this year. I mean, hey, he's doing that, and God bless him. And I'm not down on Adam Jones, and I'm not even down on Duquette and Showalter because it's the same thing with Ozzie and John Harbaugh. You don't like them? You don't like Joe Flacco? Wait till you see what the next quarterback looks like around here, right? And I feel the same way about Duquette and Buck Showalter because they're as good... Well, not Duquette. I mean, McPhail was on a different level. But, Buck's the best they've ever had. So I'm not trying to run him out of here. I'm trying to say, why would he stay? And because winning's not going to be a part of staying.
When you say shame on them, I mean, to me, if that's the mindset, they're never going to turn it around because, you're already degrading whoever's going to come in and work here. I mean, I hear your point.
Well, maybe Buck Showalter wouldn't get a job anywhere else next year, and this is his best managerial job. He took the job the first time. I mean, certainly things weren't much better then, but they did have a weeder. They had a pipeline, and maybe you can make a case for this pipeline of these young players that maybe they see them closer to 2020 than 22 that you see, right? Maybe Buck does see it as, well, we'll take our lumps next year, and in 20 we'll be 500, and by 21, Victor Mason will be the MVP of the league, and he'll be another Machado, and 3 of these kids will be up, and 2 of the pitchers will work out, and we'll sign somebody. I don't know, man. I mean, I just don't see this happening quickly because I've sat here and watched it, and the other part of this, if this was the National League Central, right, or whatever,
sure,
I might sign off on that. The Yankees and the Red Sox are good for a $1.05 the next 3 years, and that's what you're up against. Oh, and you got to see them, a quarter of the schedule too.
Well, but that's why you need to tear this thing down to not just to the ground, but to the basement. Because if you're going to truly build something and sustain it, you need to have a good farm system, and you need to have international scouting and an international presence and signing those types of players. You want to build that foundation, and then you hope at the point that you build that, then in turn you start having success again, and resources are more plentiful, and then you commit to keeping that, and you grow up the payroll again at that point in time to keep some of your young and talented players, and you hope that becomes more of a cycle, and it's not just a window like it turned out being. I mean, part of this. Every time this is discussed now, here in 2018, I think back to decisions that were made in 2015. I think back to 2015 where they got Gerardo Parra instead of selling. And think about it, if they had sold off Wei-Yin Chen and Matt Wieters at that point and Chris Davis at that point and whoever else you want to throw in that conversation. Would the Orioles have not made the wild card in 2016? Probably not.
Well, part of that was having an 85-year-old owner who wants to win too.
Well, but my point is, if they had done that then, you might have put yourself in a position where you wouldn't have had to do what you're doing now, 3 years later, where this thing has just been completely scorched. It's the scorch of the earth, where it's completely torn down. It might have been a case of, okay, maybe you would have been lean for a year, but then some of those pieces that you would have gotten in some of those trades would have built back up in 2017. And maybe in 2018 you would have been back contending again. And maybe you hadn't committed the money to Chris Davis because you had traded him instead. Maybe you would have signed Manny Machado, or maybe you would have signed Jonathan Scope at that point, and you would have had a better farm system. So my point is, you get to this point where in a season you were trying to go for it one more time, as ill-advised as that may have been. It clearly didn't work. Obviously didn't work. Painfully didn't work. and now you're at this point where you've had no choice but to completely tear it down, and you hope that you see it through now. And the reality is they should have a much lower payroll next year, and it should be more resources pumped into player development and international signings and doing as much as you can with the draft and just exhausting every avenue you can in improving player development, and you start to slowly build back up. And that's the way they need to do it if they want to build a winner and build a sustainable winner. And as much as they had a nice run over these the 5 years from 12 through 16, it's clearly over, and to
your point, it never had to get this bad. It never had to scorch the earth. If they had made better decisions, done better things with their money, not done the Chris Davis thing, maybe signed a real pitcher for real money, some kind of Scherzer kind of guy a couple of years ago with some of that money, locked up Machado 3 years ago and kept him around. We would be talking. But that comes back to competence, and that comes back to the owner and the people who run the place, and me sharing, a screenshot of 1998 to 2011, where they played, and I did the math on this, 2,268 meaningless baseball games over 14 years. They're going to play 500 in a row right now, where they don't have a chance. I mean, the next 3 years, they're not going to win the World Series, and they're going to have 500 bad baseball games from today, including the next 60, and the next 2 seasons. So, there's nothing to be excited about unless you like the Bowie Bay Sox and unless you're betting the long tail of this thing or you want a bobblehead, because, to your point, it is what it is now. There's not much for us to discuss anymore now, is there? I mean, really. I mean, what are we going to be talking about around here in May and June next year? About them being 8 games under 500 and trying to find one Eric Bedard, trying to find one Brian Roberts, trying to find one Nick Markakis somewhere next year on the team to say, we're watching that. That guy's going to be somebody will be an all-star next year. I don't know who it'll be. Maybe it'll be Bundy. I don't know. I mean, looks like he's going to survive this, right?
It could be Bundy. It could be Trey Mancini bouncing back. I mean, there's always going to be guys to watch. I mean, look, people still watch the Orioles from 1998 through 2011. Now,
I know, was it
everybody? But people still watched it because you love baseball. And, as much as those years were lean and painful, I still enjoyed the heck out of watching guys like Melvin Mora and Brian Roberts. And, you just kind of have to pick out those isolated players that you follow and emerge, and hopefully those are the guys you build around. They're looking for the next generation of those guys. And you hope it is Yusniel Diaz. You hope it is Dylan Tate. You hope it is Dean Kramer. You hope it is Trey Mancini getting back on track after a good rookie year and a not so good second year. You kind of go down the list. Tanner Scott, go down the list. So it's going to be ugly. There's no question about that. But when you get into this, you kind of have to just buy into the idea that this is the process and this is how you're going to have to do it. And if they had kind of staggered it a little bit and sold in 2015 and sold last year, they still wouldn't be good this year, but maybe they would have accelerated being good again a little bit more quickly than where they face now. But you can only control the here and now, and from that standpoint, I do give the Orioles some credit that, hey, they're not, to this point, they're not half-assing it. They're going all in on rebuilding because they traded Scope and Gosman instead of holding on to them and then saying, well, you know what? If we sign one more starting pitcher and we go out and sign Mike Moustakas, we're going to chase
the Yankees. Yeah, sure.
And but you know what? That was far too often the problem from 1998 through about the time that Andy MacPhail arrived. They always were spending more than they should have for what kind of expectation? To maybe if everything worked perfectly that you'd win 84 games? I mean, that's not the way it.
But that was what Cashner and Cobb were all about to some degree, right?
Well, and that's kind of been their. That's really from 2014. That's kind of what happened. I mean, they lost Cruz, they lost Markakis that year. Andrew Miller left, and then for every year it kind of. And they bounced back in 16 because they had a really good first half, but go back and look at the second half of 2016. They played 500. So you kind of had this slow burn, this slow fading away of what they were in 12 and what they were in 2014. And, you got to a point where if your best case scenario is winning the wild card, then this probably isn't the most sustainable way of going about doing things. And they sure learned that over the last calendar year, starting with last September and certainly carrying on to this year. So this is how they have to do it. And it's going to stink. It's going to stink for a long time, and rebuilding's not fun. But, you've got to be thinking in terms of the big picture, and the goal isn't just to be a 500 team. The goal is to hopefully be in a position where you're competing for championships one day. And you hope with the trades that they've made over the last 2 weeks that they've laid some groundwork, but they have a heck of a lot of work to do. And to your point, and I agree with it wholeheartedly, the next step needs to be who the heck is going to be running the show moving forward. Dan Duquette's handled this part. If you trusted him to do this part, why wouldn't you trust him to continue moving forward? And if you're not, then who is going to be running it moving forward? And, some of the positive signs that we've seen with some of the things that they've done here over the last, the last 3 or 4 months, going back to some of the marketing things and, with deciding to rebuild here and making a commitment to that and talking about international signings and acquiring slots and hopefully signing a guy like Victor Mesa. You need to see more of that. And if you continue to see more of those types of measures, I will feel more optimistic about the Orioles 6 months from now and a year from now and 18 months from now, even if the results aren't showing up at the major league level at that point.
All right, you and I can fight about the Ravens the next 6 months. Are we done now until Adam Jones gets dealt? Are we good? I mean, we towel off a little bit here after 8 weeks of this, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you could see a couple other guys, Valencia. Maybe someone gets desperate for Mark Trumbo if you throw in some money. But, yeah, I think the only question left on the trade front is going to be if Adam Jones reconsiders. And to this point, he seems committed to at least finishing out this year. And, if this ends up being his farewell tour for the next two months, it's not going to make or break the rebuild. It's not going to ruin Cedric Mullins. It is what it is, and Adam Jones deserves to go out the way he wants to go out.
And he shall. Luke can be found, Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. We're out in the buy, a Toyota.com audio vault all weekend. Going out with Ray Lewis. We're doing the Ravens game. We're going to be following all the stuff. And you can follow us out on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and Snapchat and Instagram. And, of course, out in the buy, a Toyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. Our morning newspaper, chock full of good stuff. Each and every morning at 7 a.m. It comes to your email inbox free of charge. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life, guaranteed. Also brought to you by the Maryland Jockey Club and our friends at Laurel, where they're racing this weekend. The entries are on the front of WNST.net as well as in our morning newspaper each and every morning. Any more breaking news? And it was like, ba-bing, ba-bing, ba-bing. It's like a pinball machine on my phone in the afternoon. Coons Ford sponsors our WNST Tech service. It's our breaking news service, the best thing we do. When deals happen, when news happens, you get it first. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis will be here on Thursday. I don't know that he's going to have a lot of Oriole reaction. I think he's going to be talking about the Bears and the Ravens and Ray Lewis. And I'm catching up with all sorts of Ravens alums all week. I've enjoyed it. I hope you guys have enjoyed some of the Ravens memories. I know this Oriole thing sort of popped in here, and we've given it a lot of time here this week. But they deserve our love, too. The Orioles need love. They do. They need your love now more than ever. I probably should do one of those commercials. Give to the Orioles now. They need you more now than ever. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.